Welcome to Alien Whispers. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Now, let's dive into the story. Elias Calder knelt in the wreckage of a scout ship, his hands buried in a snarl of wires and scorched metal. The canyon air was thick with Varyth's signature red dust, swirling around him like a living shroud, clogging his lungs and coating his patched exosuit in a gritty film. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes as he wrestled with a stubborn power cell, its casing cracked but salvageable. He'd been stranded on this alien world for weeks, ever since his ship's engines gave out in a spectacular blaze, plummeting him into the unforgiving embrace of Varyth's cracked planes. The twin suns blazed overhead, their harsh light casting jagged shadows across the canyon walls, a relentless reminder of his isolation. He was no stranger to hardship. Born on Earth's southern coasts, Elias had grown up in a fishing town battered by storms, where resilience was as much a part of life as the salt in the air. He'd left that life behind to chase dreams among the stars, trading fish for cargo, bartering his way across galaxies until this ill-fated mission grounded him. Now, his only company was the Kryn, towering reptilian beings whose scales shimmered like polished stone and whose society thrived on war. To them, Elias was an oddity, a soft skin from a distant world, tolerated only because he posed no threat. A shadow loomed over him, blocking the sun's glare. Elias looked up, squinting through the dust, to see Karath, the Kryn warlord, his ochre scales glinting with an almost metallic sheen. Karath's bony crest flared wide, a display of dominance, and his amber eyes narrowed with disdain. "Still here, soft skin?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder, edged with mockery. "No home to crawl back to." Behind him, a cluster of Kryn warriors chuckled, their claws clicking against the canyon stone floor in a rhythm that echoed their amusement. Elias stood, brushing dust from his grease-stained hands, and met Karath's gaze. "I'm fixing my ship, warlord. I'll be gone soon enough." His voice carried the faint drawl of Earth's coastlands, steady despite the jeers. Karath snorted, a plume of dust rising from his nostrils, and gestured toward a figure lingering at the edge of the group. A Kryn female, smaller than the others, her posture hunched as if braced for a blow. She stepped forward reluctantly, her ash-gray scales dull and lusterless compared to the vibrant hues of her kin. Her eyes, which should have glowed with the golden fire typical of the Kryn, were muted, drained of vitality. She clutched a heavy jug of fermented sap, her claws trembling as she approached Karath. Without so much as a glance, he lashed out with a clawed foot, sending her sprawling into the dust. The jug clattered beside her, its contents spilling into the cracked earth. "This is Vera," Karath sneered, his lip curling to reveal jagged teeth. "Widow, barren, worthless." He spat, the glob landing near her feet, a punctuation to his contempt. "Take her, human. Clean your tools, or amuse yourself. She's no use to us." Laughter erupted from the warriors, sharp and cruel, slicing through the dry air. In Kryn society, a female's value was measured by her ability to produce warriors for their endless conflicts, raids against rival tribes, battles over scarce water and fertile land. A barren widow like Vera was a pariah, her existence a blemish on the tribe's honor, tolerated only until she could be discarded. She remained still, her gaze fixed on the ground, her silence a fortress against their scorn. Elias studied her, noting the faint quiver in her claws, the way her shoulders slumped under an unseen burden. Something stirred in him, pity, perhaps, or recognition of a shared outcast status. "Thank you, warlord," he said, his tone firm, cutting through the jeers like a blade. "I accept." He stepped forward and extended a hand, a human gesture foreign to the Kryn. Vera flinched, her body tensing as if expecting violence, her eyes darting to his for a fleeting second. A spark of curiosity flickered there, then vanished beneath her guarded exterior. He held his hand steady, his expression softening. "I'm Elias, from a place called Earth." She didn't respond, her silence as unyielding as the canyon walls, but he gently took the jug from her trembling claws. "Let me carry that." He guided her away from the warriors, their laughter fading into the wind as they turned back to their plans of conquest, dismissing the exchange as beneath their notice. Elias led Varyth to his makeshift quarters, a cave carved into Varyth's red rock by eons of wind and time. Its walls were rough, streaked with veins of shimmering minerals that caught the dim light filtering through the entrance. Scavenged panels from a ship littered the floor, twisted metal and cracked circuits, a chaotic puzzle he'd been piecing together since the crash. A table fashioned from a slab of stone held his tools, a multi-tool with a worn grip, a battered scanner that buzzed faintly when activated, and a collection of improvised instruments born of desperation. Varyth stood near the entrance, her gray scales blending with the shadows, her stillness almost statuesque. "You can sit, if you want," Elias said, kneeling to tinker with a flickering control unit he'd salvaged from the ship's cockpit. She didn't move, her silence as solid as the rock around them, her presence a quiet enigma. He shrugged inwardly and returned to his work, the hum of the unit filling the space between them. Days slipped into a tense routine. Varyth performed her tasks with mechanical precision, sweeping dust from the cave's floor with a bundle of dried reeds, fetching water from a communal well sunk deep into the canyon's heart, leaving plates of smoked meat and dried roots on the table for Elias. She never spoke, her eyes avoiding his, as if meeting his gaze might unravel the fragile shell she'd built around herself. Elias, undeterred, filled the silence with stories of Earth. He spoke of oceans that crashed against cliffs, their waves a symphony of power and grace, of cities that glittered with artificial stars, their streets alive with voices and movement, of festivals where music wove through the air, binding strangers together in fleeting joy. He wasn't sure she listened, but he noticed small signs, her pointed ears twitching slightly when he described the wind through Earth's forests, or the way her claws paused mid-task when he mimicked the call of a seabird from his childhood. It was subtle, like the first cracks in a frozen river, but it gave him hope that she wasn't entirely closed off. Elias's days were consumed by the ship, a skeletal frame in the canyon where he toiled beneath the twin sun's unrelenting gaze. The engine core was a nightmare of fused circuits and warped alloys, each repair unearthing new challenges. He scavenged tirelessly, prying components from the wreckage with blistered hands, his mind racing with calculations and makeshift solutions. The Kryn offered no aid, their resources hoarded for war, axes forged from rare metals, armor hammered from the bones of fallen beasts. Elias relied on his wits and what little he'd salvaged, the multi-tool, the scanner, and a stubborn will to see Earth again. One afternoon, as he wrestled with a corroded fuel line, a young Kryn approached the canyon's edge. His scales were a rich brown, glinting in the sunlight, and he was smaller than most warriors, his frame leaner, less scarred. "You are the human," he said in halting English, his voice a mix of curiosity and effort. "I help with ship?" Elias paused, wary but intrigued. "Why?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I like machines," the Kryn replied, his claws flexing with eagerness. "Your ship different. I learn." His name was Tarek, a tinkerer among a tribe of fighters, his passion for gears and metal an anomaly in a culture that prized bloodshed. Seeing a potential ally, Elias nodded. "All right, Tarek, grab that wrench over there." The young Kryn proved a quick study, his claws surprisingly deft as he followed Elias's instructions, tightening bolts and stripping wires with a precision that belied his inexperience. Over days, they forged a cautious bond. Tarek shared fragments of Kryn history, centuries of wars over dwindling wells, tribes clashing under blood-red skies, their gods demanding sacrifice in exchange for survival. Elias countered with tales of Earth, solar farms that drank the sun's energy, starships that pierced the void, cities where peace was more than a fleeting dream. Tarek listened, his eyes bright with wonder, a flicker of something beyond the violence he'd been raised to embrace. Back in the cave, Varyth's silence held firm, but Elias sensed a shift. Her movement softened, less rigid, her ears twitching more often as he spoke. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the cave in hues of amber and shadow, Elias unearthed a data slate from his gear. Its screen was cracked, its edges dented, but it powered on with a faint hum. He tapped it, and a hologram flickered to life, a forest of towering pines, their needles swaying in an unseen breeze, the air alive with the chirps of unseen birds. "This is a forest, Vera," he said, his voice gentle. "Trees taller than Karatha's war hall, full of life you can feel in your bones." She edged closer, her steps hesitant, her eyes locked on the image of a hummingbird, its wings a blur of iridescent green. "Small," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse, barely audible over the slate's hum. Elias's heart leapt. It was her first word to him. "Yeah, tiny but fast. You can hardly catch them with your eyes." She pointed at another hologram, a human family by a river, their faces alight with laughter, water sparkling behind them. "They happy?" Her question was tentative, tinged with a wonder that seemed almost childlike. "I think so," Elias replied, his smile warm. "On Earth, children are a joy, not just soldiers for war." Her brow furrowed, confusion etching lines into her scaled face. Among the Kryn, mating was a brutal necessity, a transaction stripped of tenderness, its sole purpose to swell the ranks of their armies. Females bore the act as a duty, their worth tied to the number of warriors they produced. "Joy?" she asked, the word clumsy on her tongue, foreign and untested. Elias paused, choosing his words with care. "It's softer. There's care, pleasure for both." Her eyes searched his, grappling with the idea. Pleasure for female? The notion seemed beyond her grasp, a star too distant to touch. "For both," he corrected, his tone kind but firm. A heavy silence settled between them, thick with unspoken questions. Then, her voice a fragile thread, she asked, "Can you show me?" Elias met her gaze, seeing not just curiosity but a deep, aching need for connection, for something her world had never offered. He nodded, his expression solemn. "If that's what you want." That night, the cave transformed into a haven. Elias moved with patience, guiding her through the warmth of a touch, the intimacy of a kiss, gestures alien to the Kryn's harsh ways. There was no violence, only a mutual awakening, a discovery that lit a spark in Vera's dulled eyes. She learned her body could feel joy, not just failure, that it was more than a broken tool for others' use. As they lay together, her scales cool against his skin, a fragile hope bloomed within her, a whisper of life in a heart long resigned to emptiness. For Elias, it was a tether to his humanity, a moment of meaning in a world that felt increasingly foreign. Weeks passed, the twin suns tracing their relentless arcs across the sky. One morning, as the first light crept into the cave, Vera awoke to a wave of nausea, retching up the roots she'd eaten at dawn. The symptoms lingered, dizziness, exhaustion, gnawing at their fragile peace. Elias watched her, concern tightening his chest. "Vera, could you be—" He didn't finish, the thought too wild to voice. She was barren, or so the Kryn had decreed, her body judged useless by their healers after years of fruitless attempts with her late mate, Drakkar. Yet the signs were unmistakable, echoes of medical texts he'd studied on Earth. He retrieved his salvaged medical scanner, its casing dented but functional, and powered it on. The device whirred, casting a faint blue glow across the cave. He ran a scan, his hands steady despite the tremor in his pulse. The screen flickered, then steadied, revealing a grainy image, a tiny, pulsing heartbeat. Vera stared, her golden eyes wide with a mix of terror and awe. "I carry life," she whispered, tears tracing paths through the dust on her scales. "But how? They said I'm barren." Elias pulled her close, his mind racing. Maybe they were wrong. Or maybe, he hesitated, piecing together the improbable. Maybe human and Kryn together, it's different. Earth's genetic adaptability, its resilience, might have bridged a gap the Kryn's rigid biology couldn't. The joy was brief, shadowed by dread. If Korath discovered this, a barren female pregnant by a human, it would be an outrage, a blasphemy against their traditions and gods. Varyth and the child would be condemned, and Elias would share their fate. They vowed to keep it secret, their bond tightening around this fragile truth. Elias recalled carvings he'd found in a forgotten cave near the crash site, stumbled upon during a scavenging run. Ancient Kryn glyphs depicted warriors beneath a star, a child's silhouette cradled in its center. Tarek had helped him decipher the faded script. When the sky weeps fire and the earth trembles, a child of two bloods will rise under the broken star, bringing the rain of life. The modern Kryn mock such tales, their reign a metaphor for blood spilled in raids. But Elias wondered if this child could fulfill a prophecy they dismissed, a hope buried beneath centuries of war. Vera's pregnancy brought changes. Her scales, once lifeless, gained a faint luster, as if the life within her was mending what grief had broken. She draped herself in looser hides, concealing her swelling belly, moving with care to avoid the tribe's scrutiny. Elias threw himself into the ship, working late into the night, the canyon aglow with portable lamps that cast long, eerie shadows. Tarek joined him often, his knowledge of Kryn metallurgy invaluable as they patched the hull with scavenged plates. "You leave soon?" Tarek asked one evening, his voice tinged with melancholy. Elias glanced toward the cave where Vera rested. "Not alone," he said, and Tarek nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. Vera's voice grew stronger, her silence giving way to stories of her own. She spoke of Drakkar, a warrior with a rare gentleness, who dreamed of a Kryn unshackled from war. He died in a raid against the Iron Claws, a rival tribe, leaving her to face the tribe's scorn alone. "They called me cursed," she said, her eyes distant, tracing the cave's walls. "No young, no purpose." Elias listened, his heart heavy with her pain. He shared his own past, growing up by the sea, learning to trade among the stars, chasing wealth until Varyth trapped him. Their tales wove a bond, each revelation a stitch in a shared tapestry. The Kryn settlement thrummed with war preparations. Karatha's raids intensified, targeting Ironclaw wells to secure water for the dry season. Warriors trained relentlessly, their roars echoing through the canyons, while females tended to young, their faces etched with fatigue from endless loss. Elias and Vera kept apart, their cave a sanctuary from prying eyes. But whispers spread, Vera's absence from communal duties, Elias's guarded hours in the canyon, stoking suspicion among Karatha's followers. One day, as Elias and Tara calibrated the ship's navigation array, an elder Kryn approached. Her scales were faded with age, her gait slow but deliberate. "You are the human," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "I see you with Vera. You treat her different." Elias tensed, unsure of her intent. "She's not useless," he replied, choosing his words with care. The elder, Myra, nodded, her eyes glinting with something like respect. "Not all Kryn follow Karath. Some remember the old songs of rain and peace." She left without elaboration, but her words lingered, a flicker of hope in their shadowed existence. Vera's pregnancy progressed, her strength fading under the strain of carrying a hybrid child. Elias monitored her with the scanner, its readings erratic but showing steady growth. He taught her breathing techniques from Earth, simple rhythms to ease her pain, and she clung to them, her claws gripping his hand during the worst moments. Their nights were quiet, Vera resting against him, Elias tracing the faint scales on her arm, both dreaming of a life beyond Varyth's dust. Their fragile peace shattered one night when the sky blazed red, not with the suns, but with meteors tearing through the heavens like bleeding wounds. The air thickened, charged with an electric hum. Vera clutched Elias's arm, her voice trembling. "The sky weeps fire." Before he could answer, the ground heaved, a violent quake splitting the settlement, collapsing stone huts and scattering warriors. Dust choked the air, and cries of panic mingled with the clash of weapons as the tribe braced for battle. In the chaos, Vera's contractions began, sharp and relentless. Elias guided her to the cave, shielding her from the turmoil outside. The labor was brutal, each cry a risk as the settlement reeled. Elias stayed by her, his hands steady as he coached her through the agony, though fear gnawed at him. The scanner beeped wildly, its readings fluctuating as Vera's body strained to birth a child of two worlds. Hours dragged on, the quake's aftershocks rattling the cave, until dawn's first light pierced the entrance. With a final, wrenching push, the child emerged, slipping into Elias's hands, its tiny lungs bursting with a piercing cry. "He's a boy," Elias said, his voice thick, wrapping the infant in a clean cloth. "He's beautiful." Vera, exhausted but glowing, reached for her son. His skin was a marvel, soft, with a faint tracery of scales that shimmered faintly. His hair was dark like Elias's, but his eyes, when they opened, burned gold like Vera's, alive with a spark of human curiosity. "Oren," she whispered, the name of fusion of their worlds. Elias nodded, a surge of love and duty flooding him. Their joy was fleeting. Outside, the sounds of war swelled. The Iron Claws had struck, exploiting the quake's chaos, their warriors breaching the settlement's defenses. The Kryn fought back, their roars blending with the screams of the wounded, smoke thickening the air. Karath, desperate to unify his fracturing tribe, turned his rage on Elias and Vera. Whispers of their secrecy had reached him, twisted by suspicion into a tale of betrayal. With his elite guard, Karath stormed the cave, his massive form blocking the entrance, his war axe gleaming in the torchlight. He saw Elias cradling Oren, Vera standing defiantly beside him, and his eyes blazed with fury. "Abomination!" he roared, his voice shaking the walls. "This filth brought our ruin." He raised his axe, his crest flaring, ready to strike. Vera stepped forward, her voice a fierce cry that defied her frail frame. "He is no curse. He is a sign." Karath sneered, his teeth bared. "A sign of your treachery, Barren one." Elias, heart pounding, pointed to the sky through a fissure in the cave's roof, where a shattered star glowed, its light fractured like a promise unkept. "The prophecy," he said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at him. The sky wept fire, the earth trembled. "This is the child of two bloods." Murmurs rippled among the guards, some recalling the ancient tales, stories of rain and a child who would reshape Varyth. Karatha's laugh was a venomous snarl. "Fool's myths. This hybrid dies with you." He swung his axe, its blade a blur aimed at their lives. Elias braced to protect his family, but Oren stirred. The child's mouth opened, not in a cry, but in a sound, a pure, resonant hum that swelled into a melody, vibrating through the cave like a living pulse. The walls thrummed, and the Kryn froze, entranced. The song was ancient, stirring a buried memory in their war-weary souls, a time before blood ruled their days. Outside, the wind stilled, the chaos of battle fading into silence. A drop fell, then another. Rain, clean, abundant, unlike Varyth's rare, corrosive drizzle, cascaded over the parched land, soaking the cracked earth. The Kryn stumbled outside, awestruck, their scales gleaming under the deluge. Generations had passed since such rain fell, a miracle their ancestors had sung of in lost hymns. Oren's song grew, and the rain responded, a torrent washing away dust and despair, breathing life into the barren ground. Silas, the tribe's aged seer, shuffled forward, his eyes wet with tears, leaning on his gnarled staff. "The rain of life," he whispered, his voice quaking with reverence. "The prophecy is true." Vera lifted Oren to the sky, rain streaming over them like a baptism. "He is Varyth's starborn," she declared, her voice ringing over the storm, unbreakable. "Our hope." One by one, Karatha's guards lowered their weapons, some kneeling in the rain, their faces upturned to the miracle. Myra stood among them, her gaze proud, as if she'd foreseen this dawn. Tarek, slipping into the crowd, watched in wonder, his claws clenched with emotion. Karath stood alone, his axe trembling, his power dissolving like dust in the rain. The deluge stripped him bare, revealing a new path for the Kryn. Elias rested a hand on Vera's shoulder, their family whole, though the future loomed uncertain. Oren's song faded, but the rain persisted, nourishing Varyth's wounded heart. The Kryn faced a crossroads, cling to war or embrace life's promise. Some warriors, touched by the miracle, spoke of peace, of fields blooming under the rain. Others, tied to Karath, muttered defiance, their eyes dark with doubt. Elias and Vera knew their journey had just begun, a path lit by Oren's existence. Days later, the Kryn shifted. Myra and Silas rallied believers in the prophecy, forming a council to steer the tribe toward peace. Tarek, inspired by Elias, kept tinkering with the ship, dreaming of Earth's skies. Karath retreated to the fringes, his loyalists thinning. Elias and Vera stayed in the cave, raising Oren, teaching him Earth songs and Varyth's tales. The rain brought green to the plains, a sign of renewal in a world long starved. Above, the broken star shone, a beacon for a new age, its light proof that hope could thrive in the harshest places. Varyth transformed slowly but surely. The rain, once a myth, became a steady gift, filling dry riverbeds and turning dust to soil. The Kryn, bred for war, began planting, their claws digging with reverence into the earth. Elias shared Earth's farming tricks, irrigation, crop cycles, and the Kryn listened, their skepticism fading as sprouts broke through the ground. Vera, once shunned, became a quiet leader. Females who'd scorned her sought her counsel, their eyes wide as they watched her with Oren. She moved with newfound grace, her belly swelling with a second child, conceived in the rain's embrace. Elias stood beside her, a bridge between worlds, his knowledge a seed for a people learning to live. But dissent lingered. Karatha's loyalists, though few, hissed a betrayal, their voices shadows in the night. One evening, as the settlement slept under a starlit sky, Elias woke to footsteps. He grabbed his multi-tool, its blade glinting, and stepped outside. A crimson-scaled Kryn loomed, eyes burning with hate. "You've poisoned us, human," he growled. "This peace is weakness." It was Garrick, Karatha's fiercest follower. "The rain's a gift," Elias said, his voice calm. "A chance to thrive." Garrick snarled, lunging with claws aimed at Elias's throat. Elias dodged, striking back with a multi-tool, its blade slicing Garrick's arm. The Kryn roared, but Myra's voice cut through. "Enough." She emerged, staff raised, eyes fierce. "The council has spoken. The old ways are gone." Garrick spat and fled, but Myra's warning hung heavy. More will resist. Peace is a battle too. Years passed, and Varyth bloomed. The settlement grew into a village, stone huts ringed by golden fields. The Kryn traded with rival tribes, their weapons traded for plows. Elias's ship, once wreckage, became a monument at the village heart, a symbol of the Starborn's dawn. Oren grew, his hybrid features a harmony of both worlds, his laughter a song through the streets. Vera watched him, pride in her eyes, her hand on her belly where their second child stirred. Elias stood with her, gazing at the suns setting over mountains, the sky ablaze. "We did it," he said softly. "We found a way." Vera leaned into him, her scales warm. "For them," she whispered, eyes on Oren. "For all of us." The broken star glowed, its light a fulfilled vow. On Varyth, once dust and blood, life flourished, a testament to hope, love, and the courage to dream anew.